My family laughed when I attended my father's funeral, then the lawyer read the will and they couldn't laugh anymore. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m., sharp and demanding in the darkness of my small Savannah rental house. I jerked awake, my heart already racing the way it does when you work ICU nights and know that calls at this hour never bring good news. My fingers fumbled for the phone, muscle memory from years of emergency responses kicking in. Is this Aurora Moore? The voice was professional, careful. This is Aurora, I replied. This is Linda Rodriguez, social worker at Charleston General Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Robert Moore. He's been admitted to our ICU in critical condition, she said. I sat up straighter, my nursing instincts taking over even as my personal feelings remained frozen. What's his status? I asked. Massive heart attack. He's on life support. The doctors, they don't expect him to regain consciousness, she said. I stared at the digital clock, its red numbers blurring as I processed the information. It had been 8 years since I heard anything from the Moore family, 8 long years since I left Charleston, and every judgmental glance, every cold shoulder, every cruel word behind my back. They'd made it clear I wasn't one of them anymore. I still remember the day I walked away. Caleb was just a baby, strapped into the back seat of my car while I drove with a busted lip and a suitcase full of baby clothes. I'd finally left the man who had broken more than bones, and instead of shelter, my father gave me shame. You made your bed, he said, and that was it. But I didn't fall apart. I built a new life for us in Savannah, quiet, small, but safe. I became a nurse, worked double shifts at the hospital, read bedtime stories to Caleb between my day and night rotations. I learned how to save other people's lives when I couldn't save my own marriage. And even though my father never reached out, never apologized, never asked, I still sent money every month through old Mrs. Chen next door. I made sure he had what he needed. I never told anyone, especially not Caleb. The social worker was still talking, something about visiting hours and family notification, but all I could think was why now? Why call the daughter you cast aside? Caleb must have heard my voice because he appeared in my doorway, 13 now and tall enough to see the worry on my face even in the dim hallway light. Mom? Is everything okay? He asked. I didn't answer right away. My throat felt tight, the way it does when you're trying to hold back 8 years of hurt. I just stared at the phone in my hand, listening to the social worker's careful explanations about DNR orders and family decisions. Then Caleb stepped closer and said quietly, "Is it Grandpa?" I looked at my son, my anchor, my witness, and something in me shifted. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew this: if there was anything left to be said, I needed to be there. So I hung up the phone, called into work, and got ready to return to the place I swore I'd never see again. The ICU was smaller than I expected, fluorescent lights overhead, monitors beeping in a rhythm that spoke of lives hanging in balance. It should have felt familiar, but this time the sterile air was heavy with my own dread and 8 years of unspoken words. I stepped through the automatic doors with Caleb beside me, his hand tucked tight into mine. Heads turned from the nurse's station before we'd made it halfway down the hall. I recognized the looks, professional curiosity mixed with something else. Some of the staff nodded respectfully when they saw my hospital ID badge, others just stared like they were trying to place me. And then I saw them. Veronica and Dominic stood near the family consultation room, designer clothes perfectly pressed even at this hour, concern applied like stage makeup, just enough to look appropriate, not enough to seem genuine. Veronica's eyes locked on mine first, a flicker of disbelief, then her lips curved into that familiar territorial smile. Well, she said, loud enough for the entire nursing staff to hear. Look who finally decided to show up. Guess the prodigal daughter heard there might be inheritance involved, she added. Dominic adjusted his expensive tie, his lawyer's instincts already calculating. Interesting timing, Aurora. 8 years of radio silence, and now you're here, he said. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, shoulders back, using every ounce of professional composure I'd learned from handling crisis situations. I approached the charge nurse, showing my credentials. I'm Aurora Moore, Robert Moore's daughter. I'm an ICU nurse at Savannah Memorial. Can you give me an update on his condition? I asked. The nurse's expression softened with professional respect. Aurora, I've heard about your work. Your father's in room 314. Dr. Kim can give you the full medical rundown, she said. I didn't come for family drama. I didn't come for their approval. I came to understand what was happening to my father. Caleb stayed close to my side, watching everything with the quiet intensity of a kid who'd learned to read adult tensions. I could feel his nervous energy. I squeezed his hand and whispered, "It's okay. We're just here to see Grandpa." But I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Dr. Kim appeared with a chart, his expression grave but respectful. Aurora, I understand you're a nurse. Let me walk you through your father's condition, he said. As he began explaining the medical details, the extent of the cardiac damage, the brain activity scans, the realistic prognosis, I felt my professional training take over. But Veronica's voice cut through the medical consultation. You've been gone for 8 years. Don't act like you have any right to make decisions now, she said. Dominic nodded, already in legal mode. You abandoned this family. You have no standing here, he said. I stood there in that sterile hallway, my son's hand in mine, listening to my siblings dismiss my right to be present while my father lay dying just rooms away. But I wasn't the broken young mother who'd fled 8 years ago. I was a nurse who'd spent years helping families navigate exactly these moments. And this time, I wasn't running. The Moore family home hadn't changed, same white columns, same red brick, same ivy curling up the porch like it was trying to strangle the life beneath. But stepping through the front door after 8 years felt like walking into a morgue, cold, sterile, silent in all the wrong ways. The gathering had already begun, cousins, old neighbors, a few of Dad's former business associates from his construction company. I recognized most of the faces, though none of them looked at me directly. Their conversations dropped to whispers when I entered the room, but I could feel every sideways glance like a needle under my skin. Veronica stood near the fireplace, swirling white wine in a crystal glass like this was a networking event, not the aftermath of our father's death. Dominic leaned against the mantel beside her, one hand adjusting his Hermes tie, the other holding champagne that probably cost more than I made in a week. They looked more like they were celebrating a successful real estate closing than mourning their father. When they saw me enter with Caleb, Dominic's mouth twisted into that familiar condescending smile. Well, this should be interesting, he said loud enough for half the room to hear. The family disappointment finally shows up, he added. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others suddenly found the artwork on the far wall fascinating. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would matter to them. I kept my scrubs on. I'd come straight from my shift, even though everyone else was dressed for a society funeral. Caleb stayed close to my side, his teenage frame tense with the kind of awareness that comes from growing up with a single mom who works nights. He didn't say a word, but I could see him cataloging every expression, every whispered comment, reading the family dynamics the way only a kid who's learned to survive adult dysfunction can. We found chairs near the back of the living room, far from the fireplace and the wine. I glanced around, taking in the framed photos that still lined the walls, Veronica at her MBA graduation, Dominic being sworn in at some legal ceremony, family vacations to their beach house. Not a single picture of me. Not even from when we were kids. I wasn't surprised. I'd been airbrushed out of their perfect family narrative. Veronica caught my eye and smiled, not warm, but territorial, like I'd trespassed into her perfectly curated world. You can stay if you want, Aurora, she said with fake sweetness, but don't expect anything. Dad made his feelings about your choices very clear, she said. I gave her nothing. Caleb looked up at me then, and I saw something in his expression. Not fear, not confusion, but anticipation, as if he was waiting for something important to unfold. And somehow I knew he was right. The room fell into an awkward silence when the front door opened again. Ms. Martinez stepped in like a woman who knew exactly what kind of family drama she was walking into, same professional navy suit, same leather briefcase. But this time she carried something else, a manila envelope thick with documents and a smaller wooden box that looked handmade. Veronica barely glanced up from her wine. Dominic checked his Rolex like he had a court appearance to get to. Thank you all for being here, Ms. Martinez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd handled plenty of contentious estate readings. Per Mr. Moore's specific instructions, I'll be reading a personal letter before we address the legal documents. The air in the room shifted, became charged. A letter? Veronica scoffed, already irritated. Can't we just get to the will? We all know what it says, she said. Dominic nodded curtly. Let's not drag this out. Some of us have actual responsibilities, he said. But Ms. Martinez didn't flinch. She walked past them calmly and set the wooden box on the coffee table in front of the fireplace. Then she placed her briefcase beside it and began removing documents with deliberate precision. It was your father's express wish, she said, that this letter be read aloud before any legal matters are discussed. Veronica rolled her eyes. Dominic muttered something about theatrical nonsense. A few cousins leaned forward, curiosity getting the better of their discomfort. I stayed quiet, but Caleb sat up straighter beside me, his grip on my hand loosening just slightly. I looked down at him and his face was lit with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. He didn't say a word, but I could feel it radiating from him like he already understood something the rest of us were about to learn. And for the first time since I'd walked into that house, I didn't feel completely alone. Ms. Martinez carefully opened the wooden box and withdrew a thick envelope, the paper aged and soft from handling. The room went completely still as she unfolded what looked like pages and pages of handwritten text. Then there he was, my father's voice, speaking through words written in the same careful script I remembered from birthday cards that stopped coming 8 years ago. His handwriting was shakier now, less confident than it used to be. Ms. Martinez cleared her throat and began to read. If Aurora is hearing this, I owe you the apology I never gave. Every breath in the room seemed to freeze. I was wrong, she continued, her voice steady and clear. I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I thought you were weak. I thought you were selfish. I let myself believe what I wanted to believe because it was easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to hear. Ms. Martinez paused, looking up at me briefly before continuing. When you showed up on my porch that night, bruised, shaking, with your baby in your arms, I should have opened the door. I should have pulled you inside and said, "You're safe now." But I didn't. I let pride speak louder than love, Ms. Martinez continued. A lump formed in my throat. Caleb reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. I couldn't look away from Ms. Martinez as she read my father's words. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I was teaching you responsibility. But the truth is, I was punishing you for leaving, for choosing yourself, for daring to be stronger than I ever taught you to be, she continued to read. Behind me, I heard the subtle shifting of chairs, someone's sharp intake of breath, but I didn't turn. I couldn't, not now. I found out the truth, Aurora, about 3 years ago, Ms. Martinez read. Mrs. Chin came by with an envelope, said it was from a friend who wanted to help with my medical bills. The return address was blank, but I recognized the careful way you always wrote my name, she continued. Ms. Martinez looked up again, her professional composure softening slightly. You sent money every month for years. Quietly, no credit, no contact, just care. Even when I gave you nothing in return. Even when I pretended you didn't exist. You never stopped being my daughter, even when I stopped being your father, she read. My breath hitched. I blinked hard, trying to keep the tears from falling, but they were already there, hot, fast, silent. I watched you from a distance, Ms. Martinez continued. Mrs. Chen told me how you were doing, about your work at the hospital, about Caleb. She said he was brilliant. Said he looks at the world the way you do with kindness. She told me about the nights you worked double shifts to send me money, how you'd sit with dying patients when their families couldn't be there. How you became the nurse I always knew you could be. Ms. Martinez's voice grew stronger as she read the next part. I built houses, Aurora, but you save lives. I created structures that will crumble, but you heal hearts that will remember your touch forever. Veronica sells properties, Dominic wins cases, but you give people hope when they have nothing left. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Aurora, but if I can leave you with anything, let it be this. I was wrong. You were right. You did what I should have done years ago. You protected your child. You walked away from pain, and you built something beautiful. Ms. Martinez took a breath before reading the final paragraph. I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter, so I've made changes. They don't know yet, but they will. Gasps fluttered around the room like startled birds. Someone cursed under their breath. Veronica shifted sharply in her seat. Dominic's legal mind was already calculating. I barely heard them. All I ever wanted was to be proud of my children, Ms. Martinez read, and I am of you. Of the woman you became when I wasn't watching. Tell Caleb thank you for giving me one last chance to be a grandfather, even if it was from a distance. Ms. Martinez folded the letter carefully. Silence fell thicker than grief. No one dared to speak, but for the first time in 8 years, I heard my father loud and clear. Ms. Martinez had barely finished folding the letter when the murmurs began: confusion, anger, denial. She didn't wait for silence. She adjusted her reading glasses, opened the thick legal folder on her lap, and said, the letter was to provide context. Now, per Mr. Moore's revised, notarized, and legally binding last will and testament, I will read the final allocations, she said. Veronica let out a sharp breath through her nose, like she was preparing for battle. Dominic folded his arms across his chest and leaned back, that smug lawyer confidence returning as if the letter meant nothing. To my daughter, Aurora Elaine Moore, Ms. Martinez began, her voice steady and formal, I leave the Charleston family residence, its contents, and surrounding land in full. I felt the room turn toward me, neck snapping, disbelief flashing behind every set of eyes. My hands were frozen in my lap, Caleb's fingers still intertwined with mine. In addition, Ms. Martinez continued, I leave to Aurora Moore the sum of $300,000 in liquid assets, all remaining balances in my retirement accounts, and the full proceeds from the sale of Moore Construction Company. The air shifted, became electric. She wasn't done. And to her son, Caleb Moore, I leave a college education trust in the amount of $150,000, as well as a separate fund for any medical school expenses should he choose to follow in his mother's footsteps. My heart stopped completely. Caleb blinked up at me, his mouth slightly open, trying to process what those words meant. I was still trying to. Ms. Martinez paused, then flipped to the final page. To my son Dominic and to my daughter Veronica, I leave the following: a collection of family photo albums, my old military compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother when I turned 18. A gasp escaped from someone across the room. Veronica shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. What? Her voice was sharp, high, already shaking. That's not possible. There must be a mistake, she said. There is no mistake, Ms. Martinez said, completely unbothered. Your father amended this will 18 months ago. The documents are certified, witnessed, and registered with the county, she explained. Dominic stood too, his Harvard-trained legal mind already working. He was on pain medication. He wasn't competent to make these decisions, he said. He knew exactly what he was doing, Ms. Martinez replied, closing the folder with a definitive snap. I personally oversaw this revision. Your father was of completely sound mind, she said. There was a moment of stunned silence before she spoke again, this time softer, reading from a handwritten note attached to the will. He asked me to read this aloud, let them remember who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who stayed quiet but never stopped caring. This house should belong to the one person who never asked for anything and gave everything. Aurora understands what it means to build something lasting, she builds hope in people's darkest moments. That's worth more than any business I ever created, she said. Veronica stormed from the room, her designer heels clicking violently against the hardwood. Dominic followed after a pause, already pulling out his phone, probably calling his law firm. The rest of the family filed out in uncomfortable silence, avoiding eye contact. I didn't move. I couldn't, not because I was in shock, but because for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt chosen. You had to have manipulated him, Veronica snapped, her voice cracking as she spun toward me, wine glass still clutched in her manicured fingers. There's no way he would have changed the will on his own. You must have. She stopped short, the accusation dying in her throat. I stood perfectly still. I didn't need to say a word. The letter had already said everything. You played on his guilt, she said again, louder this time, her face flushed with rage. After everything you did to this family, you waltz back in here wearing scrubs like some kind of hero. This is pathetic, she said. Caleb shifted uncomfortably beside me, and I rested a hand on his shoulder. He didn't need protecting from their words. I just needed to remind myself that I was still standing, still here. Dominic stepped forward now, his lawyer instincts kicking in. We'll challenge this. There's no way this holds up in court. He was on medication. He was grieving. He wasn't thinking clearly, Dominic said. Ms. Martinez didn't even blink. Your father's will was amended 18 months before his health declined. He was completely lucid. I have medical documentation confirming his mental competency. It's witnessed, notarized, and filed with the probate court. There is absolutely no legal ground for dispute, she said. Dominic opened his mouth to argue again but stopped when he saw Ms. Martinez's unwavering stare. The kind of stare that came with decades of handling contested estates and zero tolerance for entitled family drama. Around us, the rest of the room had gone completely silent. Some of the cousins were whispering now, others slipping out through the front door, coats clutched awkwardly, faces turned away from the spectacle. No one wanted to be associated with what was happening, not out of loyalty to me, but out of pure social embarrassment. Veronica's breathing had turned ragged. She looked like she was teetering between a complete breakdown and a violent outburst. Her hands shook as she slammed the wine glass down on the marble sideboard. This is insane, she muttered. It's completely insane. She turned and stormed out without another word, her heels clicking furiously against the hardwood. Dominic followed a few seconds later, already pulling out his phone, probably calling his firm's estate litigation team. And just like that, the room emptied. They thought they'd erased me 8 years ago, but I was still here. And now they were the ones disappearing. The room was quiet now, not the uncomfortable quiet of family tension, but the settled quiet of truth finally spoken. I stayed where I was for a long moment, Caleb beside me, his hand still resting in mine. His grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go. Neither had I. No one else was left in the room. The murmur of angry voices had faded into the Charleston evening. Car doors slammed. Engines started. Everyone was gone. I rose slowly and walked toward my father's old office chair, tucked behind the massive oak desk where he used to pay bills and make business calls. It was still there, worn leather cracked at the arms, permanently shaped by years of his presence. I stared at it for a moment, then reached down and gently touched the armrest. Goodbye, Dad, I whispered. I forgive you. The words came easily, without the weight I'd expected them to carry. They just settled into the room like they'd been waiting 8 years to be spoken. Behind me, Caleb didn't speak. He understood that some moments need silence. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting everything in a warm golden glow, the medical journals on the bookshelf, the family photos that didn't include me, even the air itself. It all felt different now. Not hostile, not cold, just peaceful. I turned to look around the house one more time, really look at it, not as the place that had rejected me, but as the home that had finally welcomed me back. Maybe some wounds don't heal until someone acknowledges they existed. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about finally being seen. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt completely visible. Weeks later, the house was quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes, not destruction, but stillness, peace. Caleb had claimed the sunroom for his homework and art projects. Every morning before my shift, I found him there, sketching cardinals, blue jays, wrens, every bird he could spot in the backyard oak trees. His laughter sometimes echoed through the hallway, genuine and bright, filling spaces that used to feel hollow. The sound of a teenager actually happy in this house felt like a small miracle. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, but I recognized the careful handwriting immediately, Mrs. Chen. I opened it carefully, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been for years. He cried, Aurora, the note read. The day he figured out it was you sending the money. I'd never seen your father look so broken. He kept saying, she became everything I taught her not to be and she's perfect. He carried that truth with him every day until the end. I folded the letter and stepped out onto the front porch. Caleb sat on the top step, sketchpad balanced on his knees, completely absorbed in shading the wings of a red-tailed hawk. I looked out over the lawn, the ancient oak trees swaying gently in the Charleston breeze, Spanish moss hanging like gentle curtains. He saw me in the end, I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. The woman they tried to erase hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting for the truth to find its way home. And now, finally, we both had.